You know, it feels like everyone and their brother is building a web browser these days, and OpenAI is jumping into the ring with their new browser, Atlas. But what's really got people talking isn't just the AI stuff they've baked in. No, it's the absolutely radical, and some would say kind of terrifying way they've engineered the whole thing. So, let's peel back the layers and see what's really going on under the hood.
Right. So, when a seasoned engineer digs into a new piece of software and comes back saying they saw demons, you have to stop and ask, what on earth could be so scary about a web browser? That single quote really sets the stage, because we're about to look at one of the most complex, audacious, and frankly wild software designs I've seen in a long time.
So what is all the fuss about? Well, the browser itself is called Atlas. And yeah, on the surface, it's based on Chromium, which is the same engine that powers pretty much everything, right? Google Chrome, Microsoft Edge, you name it. But that's not the story. The real story, the part that's making engineers' heads spin, is the architecture underneath it all, a system they've named OAL.
Now, from OpenAI's point of view, the goal is pretty straightforward. They want Atlas to be more than just a browser. They want it to be a co-pilot for the web. The idea is to have ChatGPT integrated so deeply that it's always there, helping you out, making suggestions, and even taking actions for you, no matter what website you're on.
Okay, but to make that vision happen, OpenAI knew they couldn't just slap a new coat of paint on Chromium. They needed to do something drastic. So they made a choice that is pretty out there. They decided to literally split the browser in two. Yeah, you heard that right. And this is the heart of it. This is OWL, the OpenAI web layer. Think about it like this. For years, the big innovation in browsers was putting each tab in its own process. So if one crashed, it didn't take down the whole browser. Well, OWL takes that idea and cranks it up to 11. They moved the entire Chromium engine, the whole shebang, out of the main app and into its own separate, isolated world. So what does that actually look like? Well, on one side, you've got the Atlas app. This is the user interface, the thing you actually see and click on, and it's built with all the modern, shiny, native Apple stuff. Then on the other side, running completely on its own, is the Chromium host. That's the workhorse, the engine, doing all the heavy lifting of rendering websites. They're basically two different apps that have to constantly talk to each other to get anything done.
Now, you might be wondering, why go through all this trouble? Well, OpenAI had some pretty clear goals. They wanted the browser to start up instantly. They wanted to make sure that if a web page crashed, it wouldn't freeze or crash the whole user interface. And crucially, they wanted their own engineers to be able to build new UI features really fast without having to recompile the gigantic Chromium project every single time they made a change.
And that all sounds great on paper, doesn't it? But this is where we get into what that engineer called the hellish details. Because it begs a massive question. If your UI and your engine are living in two totally separate worlds, how in the world do they actually communicate?
The answer is a system called Mojo. Think of it as Chromium's internal plumbing, the pipes it uses to send messages between all its different parts. The problem is, the Atlas UI is written in Apple's Swift language, and the engine is C++. So, OpenAI had to build their own custom adapters from scratch just to translate messages from one world to the other. This alone is a huge piece of engineering.
And that leads to the next massive problem, rendering. So the hidden Chromium process is busy drawing the web page. But how do those pixels show up in the Atlas app window? Their solution here is both brilliant and incredibly risky. They're using a private, undocumented Apple API to basically punch a hole through their own UI, letting the image from the Chromium process shine through. It works, for now. But because it's a private API, Apple could change or remove it tomorrow, and the entire browser would just break.
Okay, so that's a lot. But let's ask an even simpler question to really understand the complexity here. Forget all that. What happens when you just click your mouse on something? And this is where we see the demons. A single, simple click goes on an absolutely bonkers journey. First, your Mac sees the click. The Atlas app grabs it, translates it into a language Chromium can understand, and sends it over to the hidden engine. But, and this is the wild part, if you click on some empty space on a web page, Chromium just says, nope, don't need this, and sends a rejection message back to Atlas. The Atlas app then has to create a brand new, completely fake click event from scratch, just to give its own UI a chance to see if maybe it wanted to do something with that original click. It's an insane round trip for one of the most basic things you can do on a computer. That whole process is what led to this reaction. It's the perfect summary, right? It feels like something straight out of Jurassic Park. It's such an incredible feat of engineering that you have to wonder if they ever stop to think about the long-term nightmare of actually maintaining it.
So, after all that, we land on the big question. Is this whole thing a groundbreaking innovation that points to the future of software? Or is it a brilliant but fundamentally insane piece of over-engineering that's destined to cause problems?
Well, one of the first big consequences of this design is that Atlas is welded to the Apple ecosystem. By building the entire UI with Apple-only technologies like SwiftUI, AppKit, and their Metal graphics engine, they've made it monumentally difficult, maybe even impossible, to ever bring this browser to Windows. And that really brings us to the great trade-off at the center of all this. On one hand, the innovation gives them a super smooth native UI that's protected from browser crashes, and it lets their developers move really fast. But on the other hand, the predicted cost is a maintenance nightmare, a scary dependence on private Apple APIs, and a huge roadblock to ever going cross-platform. And the risks just keep piling up. It turns out that to get some features working, they're also relying on bits and pieces of Chromium that Google doesn't even actively maintain anymore. That's like building a brand new skyscraper on top of a foundation that you know the original architect has abandoned.
And just when you think it can't get any more complicated, it does. For their AI agent mode to work, it needs to see the screen. But because of this whole split-brain architecture, it can't just take a normal screenshot. It has to basically reverse engineer how macOS is drawing everything on the screen and then stitch it all together into a fake screenshot for the AI. It's a workaround on top of a workaround on top of a hack.
So that's where we land. OpenAI has built something undeniably clever and ambitious. But is this the future of how we'll build complex applications, by separating the UI from the engine? Or is this a brilliant, one-of-a-kind experiment that's ultimately doomed to collapse under the sheer weight of its own complexity? Honestly, only time is going to tell.